my wife was cheating. I didn't know she was planning my funeral. She'd already chosen the casket. Sarah always talked about how strong military wives had to be and voiced concerns about how dangerous deployments could be. She even cried at the airport when I left for Afghanistan, praying for my safe return. What she didn't know was that her vulnerable husband actually specialized in counterintelligence and knew about every accident she was planning. I wasn't just another deployed soldier. I was building a case that would destroy her life. In just 90 days, her $500,000 fraud scheme would collapse, and she'd be facing federal murder conspiracy charge, all because she underestimated the man she'd married. I was sitting in my quarters at Bagram Air Base, reading Sarah's latest email about how much she missed me and couldn't wait for my safe return home. The blue glow of my laptop screen illuminated my face in the darkness, and for anyone watching, I looked like just another homesick soldier staying connected with his loving wife. But every word she wrote was being analyzed, documented, and added to a federal case file that would soon destroy everything she thought she'd built. But what I didn't know was that Sarah's betrayal went deeper than adultery and insurance fraud. She was planning to make me disappear permanently. What I also didn't know was that her lover had a criminal history that would turn this from a simple fraud case into a federal murder investigation. My name is Marcus Thompson, 31 years old, Staff Sergeant with Army Intelligence stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado. I met Sarah Williams at a veterans charity event in Colorado Springs 3 years ago. She was volunteering as an event coordinator, charming everyone with her warm smile and apparent dedication to supporting military families. Sarah seemed like the perfect military wife from day one. She understood the demands of my job, supported my deployment schedule, and genuinely appeared to respect the sacrifices that came with military life. When I told her about my work in intelligence gathering and analysis, she listened with the kind of engaged interest that made me feel valued and understood. "You're protecting all of us," she'd say, her eyes bright with what I believed was genuine. "I'm so lucky to be married to someone who serves our country." We married after dating for 18 months, a small ceremony at the base chapel with my unit brothers as witnesses. Sarah fit seamlessly into military life, attending spouse events, organizing care packages for deployed soldiers, even volunteering with Gold Star families who'd lost loved ones in combat. But there were signs I should have noticed. The way she'd ask detailed questions about my life insurance benefits, claiming she wanted to understand our financial security. Her insistence on handling all our paperwork and banking while I focused on my military duties. The gradual way she isolated me from friends outside the military, suggesting they didn't understand our lifestyle. Most concerning was her fascination with deployment casualty statistics. She'd bring up news stories about soldiers killed in training accidents or vehicle crashes, always with apparent concern, but asking surprisingly detailed questions about survivor benefits and insurance. "It's just scary," she'd explain when I questioned her morbid interest. "I need to know what would happen if something happened to you. It helps me cope with the anxiety." I rationalized away every red flag because I loved her, because she seemed to love me, and because the alternative, that I'd married someone who saw me as a financial opportunity rather than a life partner, was too devastating to consider. The morning I left for my 9-month deployment to Afghanistan, Sarah held me at the airport gate with tears streaming down her face. She whispered prayers for my safety, made me promise to be careful, and told me she'd count every day until I came home. Standing there in my ACUS, surrounded by other soldiers saying goodbye to their families, I felt grateful to have someone who loved me enough to worry about my safety. I had no idea she was crying because she knew I might not survive my homecoming. But I hadn't yet discovered the full extent of her real plan. I still had no idea what the real danger was. Afghanistan was my 3rd deployment, but my first married one. The rhythm of base life, missions, briefings, intelligence analysis, the constant hum of generators and aircraft felt familiar, but staying connected with Sarah added a new dimension to the experience. Her emails arrived like clockwork, full of updates about her volunteer work, news from the base community, and expressions of love and concern for my safety. She'd send care packages filled with my favorite snacks and handwritten notes telling me how proud she was of my service. "I've been thinking about our future," She wrote in one email that I saved because it touched me so deeply. When you come home, I want us to really focus on building something lasting. Maybe it's time we looked into that house we've been talking about, started planning for the family we want. What I didn't know was that while she was writing those emails, Sarah was also living with another man in our apartment and systematically preparing for my accidental death. The first hint came from an unexpected source, my buddy Jake from another unit, whose wife Rachel was friends with Sarah back at Fort Carson. Jake called me during one of our weekly check-ins with a question that made my blood run cold. "Hey man, Rachel wanted me to ask you something kinda weird," Jake said, his voice hesitant over the static-filled connection. "She ran into Sarah at the commissary last week, and Sarah mentioned you'd asked her to update your life insurance beneficiaries. Rachel thought it was strange timing, middle of a deployment." I felt that familiar intelligence analyst instinct kick in, the same feeling I got when pattern recognition software flagged something unusual in enemy communications. "What exactly did Sarah tell her?" "Something about you wanting to increase the coverage and change some of the details." Rachel didn't think much of it at the time, but she mentioned it to me, and I thought, I don't know, maybe I should check with you directly. I thanked Jake and ended the call, then immediately logged into our military life insurance portal. What I found made my hands shake with a combination of rage and disbelief. Sarah had indeed changed my life insurance policy. She'd increased the coverage to $500,000 and, more disturbingly, had somehow gained access to my military accounts and changed the beneficiary information. Instead of my parents being listed as secondary beneficiaries, the policy now showed only Sarah as the sole recipient of any death benefits. But the most chilling discovery was in the manner of death provisions. Sarah had specifically inquired about coverage for training accidents, vehicle crashes, and accidental deaths during leave periods. She'd even requested information about how quickly claims could be processed for different types of fatality. Should I have confronted her then, or done a deeper investigation? I chose to investigate further. In counterintelligence, we have a saying, never reveal what you know until you know everything. Sarah had made her first move, but I needed to understand the full scope of her operation before I acted. Using my authorized access to federal databases, I began building a profile on my own wife. What I discovered was a pattern of behavior that suggested this wasn't her first attempt at insurance fraud. But what I found next would prove that Sarah's plans went far beyond financial theft. She was planning murder, and I was about to become evidence in my own case. The truth was darker than anyone could have guessed, and Sarah was about to make her last mistake. Military intelligence training teaches you to follow patterns, connect seemingly unrelated data points, and build comprehensive pictures from fragmentary evidence. I applied those same skills to investigating my wife, and what I found was a systematic operation that had been months in the planning. First, I traced Sarah's digital footprint during my deployment. Using resources available through my security clearance, I discovered she'd been researching more than just insurance policies. Her search history included queries about vehicle tampering, household accidents that could cause fatal injuries, and even toxicology information about substances that could cause heart attacks in healthy adults. More disturbing was her location date. While her emails told me she was staying home, missing me, and focusing on her volunteer work, GPS tracking showed she was spending most nights at an address across town. A quick property record search revealed the address belonged to someone named Derek Vaughn, a name that triggered red flags in the criminal database. Derek Vaughn wasn't just Sarah's lover. He was a convicted felon with a history of insurance fraud, vehicle theft, and assault charges. He'd served 2 years in state prison for staging auto accidents to collect injury settlements. Sarah hadn't just found a boyfriend. She'd found a criminal partner with experience in exactly the type of schemes she was planning. But the most damaging evidence came from their own communications. Military intelligence had taught me that people planning crimes rarely maintain perfect operational security, especially when they believe their targets are thousands of miles away and completely unaware. Using legal surveillance methods available through my counterintelligence role, I discovered that Sarah and Derek had been communicating extensively about the soldier problem and discussing various scenarios for my accident when I returned from deployment. Their plan was sophisticated and chilling. They'd researched my homecoming schedule, planned a welcome home celebration that would involve alcohol and driving, and had even identified specific locations where a tragic accident could occur without raising suspicion. Derek's job was to tamper with my vehicle during the party, while Sarah would ensure I was impaired enough that any accident would look like driver error. The conversations I intercepted revealed the cold calculation behind their scheme. The beauty of this is that nobody questions a soldier dying in a car accident after a deployment. Derek had written in one message, PTSD, drinking, reckless driving. The narrative writes itself. Sarah's response was equally chilling. And I'll be the grieving widow who tried to save him from his demons. The life insurance pays out double for accidental death. Reading those messages in my quarters at Bagram, surrounded by the sounds of helicopters and fellow soldiers who would have died protecting me, I felt a rage I'd never experienced before. But I also felt something else, the satisfaction of knowing that Sarah and Derek were about to learn what happens when you target someone trained to hunt enemies of the United States. They thought they were planning the perfect crime against a naive soldier. What they were actually doing was confessing to conspiracy and attempted murder on surveillance devices operated by the U.S. military. But their biggest mistake was still to come, and it would hand me everything I needed to destroy them both. But I hadn't discovered the biggest betrayal yet. Sarah's mask was about to fall, the night she thought I'd die. I had 2 months left in my deployment when I decided to set the trap that would expose Sarah and Derek's entire operation. In counterintelligence, we call it a controlled deception, giving your targets enough information to believe they're in control while actually steering them toward their own downfall. The first step was confirming my homecoming timeline with Sarah, letting her believe she was gathering innocent information about my return schedule, while actually providing her with a rope she'd use to hang herself. "I'm so excited you'll be home for our anniversary," I wrote in an email that I knew Derek would also read. "I've been thinking about that celebration we talked about. Maybe we could invite some friends over. Really make it a party. I just want to cut loose after 9 months over here." Sarah's response came quickly, and I could practically feel her excitement through the screen. "That sounds perfect, honey. I've already been thinking about who to invite and where to have it. I want everything to be special for your homecoming." Behind her loving words, I knew she was calculating logistics for my murder. The second step was more complex. I needed to give Sarah and Derek confidence that their plan would work, while simultaneously creating evidence that would convict them. This meant appearing to play into their assumptions about my mental state and drinking habits, while actually setting up a scenario that would expose their crime. I began sending emails that suggested I was struggling with the deployment, missing alcohol, and looking forward to really celebrating when I got home. Nothing too obvious, just enough to reinforce their belief that I'd be an easy target for a drinking and driving setup. Meanwhile, I was coordinating with military investigators and federal law enforcement to ensure that Sarah and Derek's perfect crime would actually be a carefully monitored sting operation. The third step was the most personal. I had to continue pretending to love and trust Sarah, while knowing she was planning to kill me. Every email exchange, every video call where she told me how much she missed me, every care package she sent, all of it was part of her performance as the loving military wife, even as she was arranging for my death. But the most difficult part was the isolation. I couldn't tell my unit brothers what was happening without compromising the investigation. I couldn't seek emotional support from family without risking the operational security of the case. I had to carry the knowledge of Sarah's betrayal alone, maintaining the facade of a happily married soldier while building the case that would send my wife to federal prison. 3 weeks before my scheduled return, Sarah made the mistake that sealed her fate. She called me for what she claimed was a spontaneous check-in, but I could hear Derek coaching her in the background. During that call, she asked specific questions about my drinking tolerance, my driving habits when tired, and even which routes I preferred when driving home from celebrations. That call was recorded by military intelligence as part of our investigation into potential security threats to deployed personnel. Sarah's questions were so obviously related to planning a vehicular accident that even the transcription analyst flagged it as suspicious. But what came next would prove that some criminals are too confident in their own cleverness to maintain proper operational security. That night, everything would be revealed. My flight from Afghanistan landed at Colorado Springs on a crisp October morning, exactly 9 months after Sarah had cried at my departure gate. This time, she was waiting with flowers, tears, and a welcome home sign that read, "My hero returns safe." Standing there in the terminal, watching her run toward me with apparent joy and relief, I felt a surreal disconnection from the moment. To every observer, we looked like the perfect military reunion, the devoted wife welcoming home her deployed husband with love and gratitude. But I knew that behind her tears and embraces, Sarah was calculating the timeline for my murder. "I'm so glad you're home safe," she whispered as she held me, and I could hear the irony in her words, that she couldn't. I was home, but I definitely wasn't safe, at least not from her. The drive back to our apartment was filled with Sarah's chatter about the homecoming party she'd planned for that weekend. She'd invited all our friends, chosen a location at a friend's house with plenty of space for everyone, and even arranged for special drinks to celebrate my return. Every detail she mentioned had been carefully chosen to facilitate the accident that they were planning. The party location was near a dangerous curve on a mountain road. The guest list included people who could testify that I'd been drinking heavily. Even the timing, late Saturday night, was calculated to maximize the chances of a fatal crash. "I just want this to be perfect," Sarah said, reaching over to squeeze my hand as she drove. "You deserve to celebrate after everything you've been through." What she didn't know was that federal agents were already in position around our apartment, ready to document every aspect of the conspiracy she and Derek were about to execute. The reunion felt like performance art. Sarah played the role of the loving wife perfectly, cooking my favorite meals, listening to deployment stories, even being physically affectionate in ways that made my skin crawl knowing what she was planning. But the most chilling moment came when she showed me the improvements she'd made to our home while I was gone. New furniture, a bigger television, even a hot tub she'd had installed in our backyard. "I wanted everything to be perfect for when you came home," she explained, but I could see the truth. She'd been spending the insurance money before I was even dead. That night, as Sarah slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling thinking about the woman I'd married versus the person lying next to me. The Sarah who volunteered with Gold Star families had been planning to create more Gold Star families. The woman who'd cried for my safety was planning to kill me herself. 2 days before the party, Derek made his first appearance at our apartment. Sarah introduced him as a friend from her volunteer work who'd been helping her manage everything while I was deployed. He was exactly what I'd expected from his criminal record. Charming, confident, and completely convinced he was smarter than everyone around him. "Thank you for taking care of my wife while I was gone," I told him, shaking his hand and looking directly into his eyes. It means everything to know she had someone looking out for her. Derek's smile was predatory. "Just doing what any decent person would do. Sarah's special. She deserves to be protected." The irony was lost on him. The man who'd been planning to kill me was accepting my gratitude for protecting my wife. But what happened next would prove that criminals who plan perfect crimes often overlook the most obvious mistakes. The trap was set. Now it was just a matter of waiting. Saturday night arrived with the kind of clear, cold mountain air that makes Colorado famous. Sarah had outdone herself with the party preparations, dozens of guests, elaborate decorations, and enough alcohol to stock a small bar. The warm glow of string lights cast dancing shadows across excited faces, while laughter echoed through the mountain house. To everyone there, it looked like a genuine celebration of my safe return from deployment. But I knew it was actually my planned funeral reception. The party was held at the home of Derek's friend Mike, a location Sarah had chosen because it was 20 miles from our apartment via a winding mountain road with several dangerous curves and drop-offs. Sarah moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her smile bright and genuine-looking as she played the perfect military wife role. But I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the way she kept checking her watch, monitoring my alcohol consumption with the intensity of someone timing a precision operation. The route home would take us past 3 specific locations, where Derek had pre-positioned emergency road repair equipment, actually vehicle sabotage tools he'd used to ensure my accident was fatal. I played my part perfectly, acting like a soldier grateful to be home and ready to celebrate with friends. I accepted drinks, told deployment stories, and even participated in the toasts to my safe return, all while federal agents positioned around the property documented every aspect of Sarah and Derek's murder conspiracy. The key moment came when Sarah insisted on taking photos to commemorate the night. She made sure to capture images of me drinking, laughing loudly, and appearing increasingly intoxicated. Those photos were meant to establish a timeline showing my impaired state before the tragic accident Derek had planned. But what Sarah didn't know was that every drink I'd accepted had been quietly emptied into plant pots, bathroom sinks, or handed off to undercover agents. I was completely sober, while appearing to be dangerously drunk. At 11:30 p.m., Sarah approached me with a concerned expression that I now recognized as practiced manipulation. "Honey, maybe we should start thinking about heading home. You've had quite a bit to drink, and I'm worried about the mountain roads." This was the moment they'd been planning for months. Sarah would express concern about my drinking. I would insist on driving anyway, playing into the narrative of the reckless, PTSD-affected veteran. And Derek would excuse himself to check something in the parking area where my vehicle was parked. "You're right," I said, loudly enough for other guests to hear. "But I'm fine to drive. I've driven these roads 1,000 times." "Are you sure?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying just the right note of worried wife, trying to prevent her husband from making a dangerous mistake. "Maybe we should call a cab or ask someone else to drive." Several guests joined in, encouraging me to find alternative transportation, exactly as Sarah had planned. Their later testimony would establish that multiple people had tried to prevent me from driving while intoxicated, making my accidental death appear even more tragic and avoidable. "I'm driving," I insisted, playing the stubborn drunk veteran role perfectly. I didn't survive 9 months in Afghanistan to be killed by a Colorado mountain. The irony of that statement would later be entered as evidence in Sarah's trial. As I loudly announced our departure and stumbled toward the parking area, Derek excused himself to help me get to my car safely. In reality, he was going to disable my brakes, steering, or other critical systems to ensure that my drive home would be my last. But what Derek found when he reached my vehicle would destroy everything he and Sarah had planned for months. And the most satisfying moment of my night was about to arrive. The moment her perfect plan shattered. In the parking area, Derek discovered that my vehicle was surrounded by federal agents who'd been waiting for him to attempt sabotage. The moment he touched my car with the tools he'd brought to disable the brakes, he was arrested for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and violation of federal laws protecting military personnel. The look of shock on Derek's face as FBI agents placed him in handcuffs was captured on the surveillance video that would later be played at his trial. This wasn't a simple drunk driving accident waiting to happen. It was a carefully orchestrated murder attempt against a deployed service member. Back at the party, Sarah was still playing her role as the concerned wife, trying to prevent her husband's tragic mistake. She had no idea that her criminal partner was already in federal custody and that every word she'd spoken that evening had been recorded as evidence. "I just can't let you drive home like this," she told me, her voice carrying the perfect note of loving desperation. "What if something happens to you?" I couldn't live with myself. "Nothing's going to happen," I replied, maintaining my performance as the intoxicated soldier. "I'm invincible, remember? I'm a war veteran." What happened next would be replayed in federal court as evidence of Sarah's consciousness of guilt and her role in the conspiracy to kill me. When Derek failed to return from the parking area, Sarah became visibly agitated. She kept checking her phone, glancing toward the door, and making excuses to step outside. Her behavior was so obviously connected to Derek's absence that several party guests later commented on how strange she seemed during those final 30 minutes. At midnight, federal agents entered the party and asked to speak with Sarah privately. I watched from across the room as they informed her that her friend, Derek, had been arrested for attempting to sabotage my vehicle. and that she was being detained for questioning in connection with a murder conspiracy. The transformation was immediate and complete. The loving, concerned military wife vanished, replaced by someone desperately searching for an escape route. Sarah's eyes darted between the agents, the exits, and me, as if she couldn't understand how her perfect plan had been discovered. "This is insane," she said, her voice rising with panic. "I don't know what you're talking about. Derek was just helping with the party. Marcus, tell them this is crazy." I looked at my wife, the woman I'd loved, trusted, and planned to build a life with, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "Actually, Sarah," I said, my voice completely sober and steady, "I think you should know something. I'm not just a deployed soldier. I work in counterintelligence, and I've been building a case against you for the past 4 months." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of other party guests realizing they'd witnessed something far more serious than a homecoming celebration. Sarah was arrested that night on federal charges of conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and violations of laws protecting military service members. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Recorded conversations with Derek, documented insurance policy changes, surveillance footage of their planning meetings, and her own recorded statements from the party. But the most damaging evidence was her complete lack of surprise when agents described Derek's sabotage attempt. An innocent person would have been shocked and confused. Sarah's immediate defensiveness and attempts to distance herself from Derek proved she knew exactly what he'd been planning to do to my vehicle. 6 months later, Derek pled guilty to attempted murder and was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Sarah, who maintained her innocence despite overwhelming evidence, was convicted on all charges and received 12 years. The woman who'd cried at the airport for my safe return was now serving time for planning my murder. The military takes threats against its personnel very seriously, especially when those threats come from within military families. Sarah's case became a training in the Army Intelligence School, demonstrating how enemies can come from unexpected sources and how important it is to maintain operational security, even in personal relationships. I remained in the military for 2 more years after Sarah's conviction, but the experience had fundamentally changed how I viewed trust and relationships. The woman I'd shared my bed with had been planning to kill me for insurance money. The person I'd confided my fears and hopes to had been calculating the best way to make me disappear. But the case also vindicated my faith in military training and military justice, the skills that made me effective in counterintelligence, pattern recognition, surveillance detection, evidence collection had saved my life and prevented Sarah from victimizing other service members. During the investigation, we discovered that Sarah and Derek had been researching other military spouses with significant life insurance policies. My case prevented what could have been a serial killing spree targeting deployed soldiers and their families. I eventually left the military and now work as a private investigator specializing in insurance fraud cases. The experience with Sarah taught me that some of the most dangerous criminals are the ones who appear most trustworthy, most loving, most concerned for your welfare. Derek was released on parole after serving 8 years of his sentence. According to probation reports, he works in construction and claims to have found religion while in prison. I hope that's true, but I also hope law enforcement keeps watching him. Sarah is still serving her sentence at a federal facility in Texas. She's filed multiple appeals claiming prosecutorial misconduct and ineffective counsel, but none have been successful. According to her former cellmate who contacted me after her own release, Sarah still maintains that she was framed by a paranoid military husband who couldn't handle civilian life. Some people never accept responsibility for their choices. I remarried 3 years ago to Jennifer, a fellow veteran who understands both the demands of military life and the importance of absolute honesty in relationships. We have a daughter now, and I've found the kind of genuine happiness that Sarah only pretended to offer. But I'll never forget the lesson she taught me. Sometimes the person sleeping next to you is the enemy, and sometimes the greatest threat to your life comes from someone who claims to love you most. Looking back, I realize Sarah made the classic mistake that destroys most criminals. She assumed her target was exactly what he appeared to be on the surface. She saw a deployed soldier and assumed vulnerability, isolation, and limited ability to fight back. But military intelligence training teaches you that assumptions are dangerous and that the most effective operations come from understanding your target completely before you act. Sarah never bothered to truly understand who she'd married or what skills I possessed. The most chilling aspect of her betrayal wasn't the financial motivation. It was the calculated, emotional manipulation. She'd spent months perfecting the performance of a loving, concerned military wife while simultaneously planning my murder. Every tear, every care package, every expression of love was part of an elaborate deception designed to position herself as the grieving widow. But there's something beautiful about how justice worked in this case. Sarah's own communications, her own choices, her own actions became the evidence that convicted her. She documented her conspiracy so thoroughly that the prosecution barely needed to present additional evidence. Have you ever trusted someone completely only to discover they were planning to destroy you? Military families are particularly vulnerable to these kinds of betrayals because deployment creates opportunities for the people we trust most to exploit our absence. Sometimes the best revenge isn't planning elaborate schemes. It's simply being better prepared than the person trying to betray you. Training, awareness, and documentation can turn a victim into a survivor and a criminal into a convict. And if you think this story was satisfying, wait until you hear about the military contractor who tried to sell weapons to enemy forces and accidentally sold them to undercover federal agents. But that's a story for another time. Do you think 12 years was enough? Should attempted murder of a deployed soldier carry life in prison? What would you have done in my position? Drop your thoughts below. This happens to more military families than you'd believe. Let me know what you think. And if you want more military justice stories like this, where the good guys actually win, hit that subscribe button. These stories need to be told.